your new play is called The Trial of Abdus Salam. And I mean, Abdus Salam is I mean, I hate to say this, but that he's a controversial figure in Pakistan. And the reason I hate to say that is because there is no reason why he should be controversial.
This work that he did in the unification of forces was like fascinating, combined with his work with this whole thing of trying to create a global movement for scientists and science in the form of the ICTP Trieste.
The two characters, I mean, if I can say them, character Chandrasekhar and Salam, their trajectories are different, their paths are different. How do you see that connecting to South Asia, or connecting to the developing world, connecting to the colonial context as the way it has developed in the 20th century?
Now, Chandra, when he presented this theory to Eddington, was brutally and, in fact, in certain ways, cunningly cut down to size. So there was a very infamous episode which happened in the Royal Astronomical Society where basically Eddington led him off the garden path and he presented his paper. Chandra presented his paper, and he was essentially booed and humiliated publicly by Eddington and others.
Salam's story is tragic in many ways, and your play actually does a very good job. I mean, that's what it addresses, that Salam wants to be buried in Pakistan. He wants to come back. He always carries Pakistani passport.
And I think he had great fondness for his roots. Like, I think one of the first things he did after getting the Nobel was to visit his ailing maths teacher in Calcutta, the person who used to teach him in Lahore. He talks very fondly of the time that he stood first in his high school exams, and the whole village came out to welcome him. So I think he had a very deep love for the land and its people.
Hello, Kainatis. This is Kainaati Chai. And this time we'll do it in English, but we will have some Urdu Hindi sometimes mixed in as well. And I'll tell you in a second why. Our guest is Nilanjan P. Choudhury. He's a novelist, he's a theater maker, he's a science communicator, and we'll be talking a lot about science in his plays in a second. But his most recent novel is Song of the Golden Sparrow. And his debut novel was a mythological thriller that was titled Bali and the Ocean of Milk, which I actually really find it fascinating. I haven't read it, but I will. I will do that. But and it seems like his plays are. I mean, his novels are set in different locations, and right now, one of the reasons why we are talking with him is because he had a play which was called The Square Root of a Sonnet, a beautiful name, and it was about astrophysicist, Indian American astrophysicist Subrahmanyan Chandrasekhar. And his most recent play is called The Trial of Abdus Salam. From Pakistan perspective, we know that. And these plays have had hundreds of stage performances across India, UK, US, and other things. And he lives in Bangalore. And so, Nilanjan, welcome to Kainaati Chai.
बहुत शुक्रिया आपकी आपने कहा था कि पार्शली हिंदी, पार्शली उर्दू, पार्शली अंग्रेजी में होगी। सो अब आपके आपके बहुत शुक्रिया मुझे बुलाने के लिए।
Uh,
और आई एम लुकिंग फॉरवर्ड टू दिस। थैंक यू सो मच, एंड आई थिंक इट्स अ fascinating sort of podcast that you're doing. I don't think it's very like common, but I think it's a beautiful sort of thing to do.
नहीं, एंड थैंक यू सो मच। और हमें वो कहते हैं कि चले, बात तो हो रही है, जंग हो या ना हो, हमारी बातचीत चलती रहे। आई थिंक दैट इज मोर इम्पोर्टेंट।
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's get right into it, right? Your new play is called The Trial of Abdus Salam. And I mean, Abdus Salam is I mean, I hate to say this, but that he's a controversial figure in Pakistan. The reason I hate to say that is because there is no reason why he should be controversial, but he is, right? Okay, so why did you pick him as a subject for your play?
So I studied physics and till my post graduation, and then I didn't become a professional physicist But science is something that has sort of stayed on with me. And before I come to the Abdus Salam question specifically, I mean, I developed an interest in theater, and then it sort of at one point of time got integrated with my interest in science, in the medium of another very absolutely path-breaking play called Copenhagen by Michael Frayn, uh, which is the story of Niels Bohr Heisenberg and Niels Bohr's wife Margaret. And I uh, then sort of have always wanted to integrate science and theater and storytelling in the way that is not been done too much or even at all in South Asia slash India, but has been done on multiple occasions in the West, whether it is in the form of films or theater and so on. You know, there's the story of Oppenheimer, which is first came out as a play. There is the story of John Nash, of Alan Turing, Feynman, and so many others. Rosalind Franklin. So I thought that was a gap, and I also thought that my ability to span both these worlds of science and theater in a certain way uh, sort of seemed to me to be an exciting proposition, an exciting journey. So it began with the first story that I thought had dramatic potential, which is the story of Subrahmanyan Chandrasekhar and his very strange, well, not strange, but a very rich type of relationship, mysterious type of relationship with his mentor, Arthur Eddington. So that was a sort of what I would place as a psychological drama. You know, it's about two people and their psychological makeups, which the psychological characteristic which make for the conflict in the play. And without conflict, at least for a person of my abilities, I find it difficult to tell a story. uh, Abdus Salam's story, of course, I knew for a very long time, and I had always felt that there was a story to be told there, and a story to be told there at multiple levels. You know, this whole the way that he resolved the conflict in himself on faith versus science. I mean, there was no verses for him. It was faith and science which sort of came together in a very organic way. His interpretation of the Quran, his reading of the Quran, and its message, which is a message of unity, which is a message of love, so to speak, and a message which I think has often been distorted in modern readings of the Quran, and the understanding of the faith of Islam across the world. So I thought that was one very interesting element that coexisted in this person. The second one was when I write uh, plays, I make a good deal of effort to have some of the science come through in the play. So for example, in the sonnet play, there is almost a 25-minute section on very technical details on how a black hole is formed, including the mistakes that earlier astronomers made in its understanding and things like that. So I find it very interesting and challenging to present the science behind the scientist, as well as the person behind the scientist. And I thought this work that he did in the unification of forces was like fascinating, combined with his work with this whole thing of trying to create a global movement for scientists and science in the form of the ICTP in Trieste. And without pulling any punches, what you mentioned as controversial, but this whole issue of identity based politics, uh, completely distorting, I don't know, decision making at the highest level, completely poisoning society and communities in many ways. So so whatever has been done to the Ahmadiyas, whatever continues to be done to the Ahmadiyas, I think the problem lasts till today, merely on a certain uh, interpretation. And I am no Islamic scholar myself, but on an interpretation of the holy book and other things. uh, the use of what do you call it, maslas like this, to politicize communities, to use it for inflamed emotions, I think is very relevant in today's time. And I just thought that this entire mix, which is the political, the faith versus religion versus science, the beauty of the science itself, uh, and the fact that we see these identity-based politics, becoming very prevalent all across the world, made it a sort of fascinating theme for me to explore.
Yeah, so thank you. I mean that's I mean there are I mean you have laid out sort of like so many different things associated with that, and why um sort of like a person like Salam would fill in sort of like all of these, or address in some ways these different characters. So if we can just take a few of those things. I mean, I think it's interesting that you mentioned with Chandrasekhar, Subrahmanyan Chandrasekhar, or with other things as well, like that in the plays usually you look for the conflict, right? Like in terms of the
Yes.
development. But it's interesting that you also started with Salam. That actually one of the interesting things is that he actually did not find
Yeah.
conflict within science and faith, and he
Yes.
explicitly talked about it. So that's an interesting context, but the conflict came from outside
Yes. Absolutely.
of his identity. I
Ab-
mean, in some sense, and so uh, I'm just curious when you are thinking
There
about
is a great irony
the
there. I mean,
yeah,
the faith that he holds so dear to him,
right,
he holds it so close to his heart. He credits his the cultural environment, or the cultural influence of Islam as being very fundamental to his work
right,
around unification,
r-
and his deep pain at being declared a non-Muslim. Like you're saying, there was no conflict within him, but the conflict came from outside. Yeah, and how
right.
does he reconcile that?
Right, and so that's what I wanted to get to. I mean, in some sense, how do you see? And I wanted to actually go separately, but let's combine it together. Uh, the science behind Abdus Salam, and you bring it in your play. You actually spend quite a bit of time in this play as well. In the science that he is doing and the religious worldview, do you think those are playing a role hand in hand? And do you see that happening with Chandrasekhar's theories, for example? I mean, his faith issue is different, but I'm just curious, when you're writing a play, you are thinking about a character, how that character is thinking about science. And so I'm curious, how did you see Abdul Salam thinking in terms of his ideas of science versus his own personal beliefs? How did you see that? And just contrast that, or compare that with Chandrasekhar.
Uh, so let me try and answer. I mean, the first thing is that the form of all these, they're not documentaries, they're not
Right.
biographies, they're not even films. Because films, and of course biographies, certainly more, documentaries much more, uh, well, have this need to for the whole thing to take place in a very realistic setting,
Right.
right? Which I don't have that constraint when it comes to theater, in the sense that, for example, this play on Abdus Salam is situated where he is actually in the last hour of his life. He's about to die, and in the final hour of his life, there is a voice which appears sort of in his head. That voice represents his past. There's multiple voices from the past who have, his friends, his lovers, famous people, politicians, all of them arrive and greet him and meet him in the final hour of his life. They're all played by one person.
And they have a
So,
mask that comes in,
yes,
if
yes.
I can say,
And
yeah.
they use, a mask sort of device to
Yeah.
portray these various characters. So, the first thing, I portray what I try to do is portray the psychological journeys of these people, whether it is a Chandra or a Salam or whatever. That necessarily means that I'm guessing.
Right.
Okay, because I don't know. There is evidence, for example, of Salam having made diary entries when he was declared a heretic. I know that, so I know that he was deeply wounded. Uh, what did he specifically think of when there were flip flops on the Pakistani establishment side? Sometimes they will honor him with the highest civilian award. Sometimes he will be called a traitor, etc. Now, in a format like a play, you can't go into every single aspect, but I've tried to basically portray all the key psychological milestones, or the whole psychological journey of what lasts what that person thinks of or remembers if he were to look back on his life. And this I prepare through materials such as biographies, interviews, etc., which are luckily available in the case of Salam through his own writings. And so when I look at how Salam tried to reconcile this, like I said, I don't think that there was any contradiction in within himself. He was, there is this famous line by Chekhov, uh, where he says, "Oh my people, look how you live." And I think a lot of what Salam tries to say is this: "Oh my people, look how you live. This world is so grand and so beautiful. Why, what Islam teaches, what the Quran teaches, has a majesty to it. Without that majesty, this, the Renaissance that talks about, there's a whole 2 pages in the book about the between the 8th and the 12th century, when people like Omar Khayyam, Al Khwarizmi, and all these people were the golden bridge between the old and the new worlds, and they laid the foundation of the European Renaissance. It's a topic that was very dear to him. So it's really that, I mean, all these people are basically trying to say that we may be petty human beings consumed by our small little things, consumed by this divisiveness and all that, but we all inhabit a universe which is so beautiful, so grand, so majestic, and so mysterious. So can we not use these things to, inspire us to look into the universe in a deeper sense, get this mysterious feeling of the of not understanding, which is where really I think the whole sense of divinity comes from, the point beyond which your mathematics doesn't work, the point beyond which your experiments don't work. So that, I think, Salam, I think, was far more, to use a maybe a snappy word, mystical. Chandra, not so much. Chandra was, a lot more Western, I would think, in his, mental makeup. He also, since the age of 19, he was basically abroad. Although he was, he was continued to stay connected with India, but he basically spent most of his life abroad from the age of 19. And however, his mentor, which is Sir Arthur Eddington, he was a Quaker and he had very strong religious beliefs. So, and in the play on the Square of a Sonnet explores this as well. So he, for example, could not accept the idea of the gravitational collapse of stars, which, by the way, he himself had predicted at one point of time, and he retracted that, because he could not believe in the idea of such an illogical thing, that a giant star, which is one of God's finest creations, would collapse into nothing.
Yeah.
So,
Can I so for people who don't know, can you give a brief sort of like background of Chandrasekhar and
sure.
Sir Arthur Eddington? Because I mean, for astronomer, especially anybody who's interested in astronomy, these two figures are the giants because
Yes.
of, and one of the most interesting objects in the universe, which are the black holes. So if you can say just a couple of words to set their sort of like their relationship, and
Sure.
what are they arguing about?
So I think, older man was Sir Arthur Eddington. In his time, which is in the early 1900s, he was among the foremost physicists and astronomers of the world. He is credited, not he's credited, but he is credited with being among the three people in the world who, at one point of time, understood Einstein's general theory of relativity. In fact, when he was told this, he said, "I don't know who the third is." Okay, very erudite, very learned man, and he in fact performed what is called, I think, among the three great experiments of the 20th century, which is he provided one of the proofs of the general theory of relativity and Einstein's theory of gravitation by conducting a very famous experiment in Principe of West Africa, which showed that light is bent by mass.
So
Now, this
at a
is
total solar eclipse.
during a
So that
total
was the
solar
famous
eclipse.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So he was a astronomer in Cambridge, and then it so happened that in 1930, Subrahmanyan Chandrasekhar, who was actually the nephew of a very famous Indian scientist, C.V. Raman, went to Cambridge to do his PhD. And one of his guides was Sir Arthur Eddington, and this is in 1930. On the journey from Bombay to Dover on the ship, Chandrasekhar essentially stumbled upon the idea of stars which would continue to collapse until, and he couldn't say really what they would collapse into, but they would collapse into something very, very small. And he published he wrote a paper called the maximum limit of white dwarf stars. White dwarfs were these aging stars which were running out of fuel to burn. And what was unique about Chandra's work, I think, was that this prediction of a giant object like a star collapsing into essentially nothing required him to combine the theories of quantum mechanics as well as special relativity. So there was this, remarkable sort of understanding and fusion of these two ideas inside the head of this 19-year-old boy, and it was path breaking. He of course didn't predict black holes, but he predicted neutron stars. And the next stage of neutron stars, to the best of my knowledge, is after a couple of more steps they become what are known as black holes. Now Chandra, when he presented this theory to Eddington, uh, was brutally and in fact in certain ways cunningly cut down to size. So there was a very famous, infamous episode which happened in the Royal Astronomical Society where basically Eddington led him up the garden path and he presented his paper. Chandra presented his paper, and he was essentially booed and humiliated publicly by Eddington and others, saying that basically what you're doing is absolute BS.
And
And that
how old is Chandra at that time?
he this happened in 1935, between 1930 to 35. So he would have been 24.
Yeah, it's very young.
24. And but the essence of his theories was written when he was 19, and the next 3 4 years he actually went around trying to convince people that it was correct, and nobody believed him. And then I think a lot of the play delves into why Eddington did this to Chandra in the first place. Was it because it was, that he, as a Quaker and a devout Christian, he couldn't accept the idea of an infinitely collapsing star, that it went against some theories of his own? What was at the heart of it? And there is a very intriguing relationship between Chandra and Eddington, because Chandra keeps paying tribute to him till the end of his life. In fact, as I've written in the play, in his so anyway, to just backtrack, so 1935 the work gets buried, and Chandra doesn't enter into that field for a very long time. He goes into all sorts of other areas, hydrodynamics and things like that. Only at the age of I think 64 he returns to the study of black holes, because by that time his original paper is being uncovered, discovered, rediscovered. But by that time he's a little late in the game, because that science has already flourished a fair bit. And so he's finally acknowledged in the form of a Nobel Prize, although he says it wasn't very important to be, 1983, 53 years after, and he's awarded the prize for that discovery he made at the age of 19, 53 years later. So, however, in his Nobel acceptance speech, he refers to Eddington 11 times. He sent Eddington, food packages when he was dying and things like that. So there is this strange relationship. There is also almost like a Shakespearean tragic hero in the form of Eddington, because this person who was at one point of time even more famous than Einstein, by the time he dies, I think in 1945, he had essentially gone off the rails, and he wrote absolute rubbish, like he predicted from pure mathematics that the total number of particles in the universe, elementary particles in the universe, is 136 multiplied by 2 to the power 256. And he predicted this apparently from pure mathematics, which Pauli actually later on calls, this is pure nonsense, it's for poets, not physicists. So there is this descent
Nice.
of this great man, and there is this resilience of this young boy who gave everything that he had to his science till a very ripe old age. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean it's a really fascinating. The play is really amazing as well, and the play is available if people want to buy it. I mean, I think you is it in print, right?
Well, it is in print by a like a very nobody publishes plays in India anymore. Not too many in the world, but there is a publisher called Writers Workshop. It's not easy to get it, but it will be published. It will be published along with the third science play that I've written. Late early next year, and that should be available on Kindle, etc. But if anybody is interested, they can always write to me, and I'll figure out a way of getting it to them.
Okay, so it's the square root of a sonnet, and again, I mean, these stories are really interesting. So if I can, um, towards the end, if I can connect some of the threads that we are talking about. I mean, obviously, you are interested. You are writing from the perspective of being in South Asia. You are in India. You are writing about these two scientists in particular, the ones that we have talked about, Salam and Chandrasekhar, who are uh, straddling those boundaries, or they are there. I mean, they grew up in South Asia and then they are somewhere else. uh, how
But
do
I
you
have
see?
just, by the
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
finished a third play, which is on India's first woman physicist.
Ah, okay, all right,
Yeah,
yeah. So
so that trilogy will be published next year.
okay, so how do you see, so the role of, I mean, the colonialism or colonial history is tied
Yes.
to that. How do you see that play? Because I mean, in some sense, the two characters, I mean, if I can say them, character Chandrasekhar and Salam, their trajectories are different, their paths are different. How do you see that connecting to South Asia, or connecting to the developing world, connecting
Yeah.
to the colonial context as the way it has developed in the 20th century?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think that encounter, especially for these people, was both good and bad. Good in the sense that India sort of got plugged in into a global ecosystem of science, which it might not have, had it remained, I don't know, these are all theories, but had it remained an independent country, it may not have been, because there were scholarships. The British came up
Mm.
and set all these colleges. There were these teachers who used to come over, in a certain strange way, and I don't know, there must be other people who need to, figure out why this happened. Is this period from 1900 to about 1940 50 was extraordinarily rich in the type of fundamental research that actually came out of India. There was starting from Jagdish Bose to Satyendranath Bose to C.V. Raman to Chandrasekhar to Meghnad Saha, to even continuing Homi Bhabha,
Mm.
extraordinarily rich period. Now it could of course be that this was the period when quantum mechanics and relativity had just been delivered to the world, so to speak, and so you this is extraordinary flourishing of the physical sciences, and discoveries were being made almost on a 6 monthly type of basis, and so if there were bright Indians who are part of the scene, they had a greater chance of contributing to something that is fundamental in nature. I don't think that sort of advancement in the basic sciences has happened, for example, since the 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. One reason, of course, physics is, I think, just a lot more harder to do. uh, Experimentation has gone on to the, from tabletop experiments to huge particle
Sure,
accelerators
yeah.
and whatnot. So maybe those are the reasons. But the flip side, I think, of colonialism, which is dealt with in the plays, not always directly, is the question is raised. Like the square root of a sonnet is almost a little like a Rashomon like play. It takes this incident of Eddington's humiliation of Chandrasekhar and raises the question why. Was it because of Eddington's religious beliefs? Was it because of his scientific ethos? Or was it because of colonialism? And it raises the question. The evidence that have at least been able to garner is that I don't think colonialism was at the heart of this matter.
Mm.
Chandra, on the other hand, did face colonialism, I mean, racist attitudes, both in Britain, less so, but certainly significant amounts of it when he came to America. When was that? 1939. So he and Lalita Chandrasekhar, they were in small town US. Lalita especially writes a lot about, and she was very evolved in a way, politically. She used to go all around the country trying to change the perception of India as a land of snake charmers and things like that. This is very early America. Chandra himself had to do work in the Manhattan Project, but very applied work, which is ballistics and classical mechanics and things like that. Although I'm sure that he was smart enough scientist, or extremely gifted scientist, who would have been welcome in the Manhattan Project in maybe in some other day and age. So there were all these things. There is a story of Lalita and Chandra driving around the entire night and being turned away from one motel to the other, and so on. But I think there was no bitterness in either
Mm.
of them. I mean, they sort of were able to get over this whole thing and contribute to the American universities in which they worked in a very, very, uh, you know, uh, in a deep way. Similarly with Salam, I think he uh, probably benefited in a way from the colonial encounter,
Yeah.
which is that he got a scholarship. He went to Imperial College, and then he went to Cambridge, and because he was so prodigiously gifted, he got plugged into this sort of global ecosystem through this colonial encounter, is what I think. I mean, yeah.
And then he kept on going. I mean, the trajectory
Of
part,
course, I mean,
but
just to
yeah,
complete that
yeah,
loop, of course, you may be aware that when he was trying to set up, the ICTP, and he in fact had I think contested for the UN, not the General Assembly, but I think for the head of UNESCO, if I'm not mistaken,
yeah.
and he didn't get, neither of the Western countries, but nor the Asian countries, really put their votes behind him. So I think it's a mixed bag, really.
Yeah, and that's where it gets sort of like interesting in there, but also Salam, but he was really focused on bringing science to the developing world. I mean, I think that
Yes,
one aspect was his obsession,
yes,
in
yes.
some sense, like that opportunity that you were talking about, that how in the early 20th century there were so many Indians that got sort of like into theoretical physics and other types of things. I think Salam saw that as one of the things, his own background
What I
itself, I
really
mean,
like
growing up.
about Salam is that I don't think there was a sense of victimhood in him.
Right. Yeah.
It was that, yeah, 200 years, we've been colonized, but we can do it. We have
Right.
this glorious heritage, and I'm going to do it.
Right.
And I think he had great fondness for like his roots. Like, I think one of the first things he did after getting the Nobel was to visit his ailing maths teacher in Calcutta,
Yeah.
the person who used to teach him in Lahore. He talks very fondly of the time that he stood first in his high school exams, and the whole village came out to welcome him. So I think he had a very deep love for the the land and its people. Although he spent it in the West, and like you're rightly saying, he did try and a lot to revive scientific thinking and institutions in Asia and for the world.
And it continues to do that. I mean, his ICTP, for example. I mean, that's such a it's in Italy, but it actually caters to the developing world scientists and to develop in
Exactly.
there. I think that's part of it. I mean, Salam's story is tragic in many ways, and your play actually does a very good job. I mean, that's what it addresses, like that Salam wants to be buried in Pakistan. He wants to come back. He always carries Pakistani passport, and it's the country that actually shuns him in many ways, and initially it has bipolar reaction to him, but towards the end, ultimately, like overall, it actually shuns him, and he is buried there, but his gravestone gets sort of like modified and removes the word Muslim from there as a Muslim laureate, and which is that it's an incredibly tragic story from that perspective. Um, but I wanted to say India has been doing, like amazing in terms of science in the last 20, 30 years as well. I mean, like and it has been on an upward trajectory in terms of space, also in terms of general development. But there is also a reactionary element happening over there. How do you see India's trajectory, especially in terms of science and in terms of these other elements that are taking place? Where are we looking at? Because you also mentioned that some of these conflicts, in some sense, especially regarding identity, are being played out in the entire world. I mean, we are
Yeah,
not outside of it, and so
yeah,
neither is India, neither is Pakistan. But certainly, I mean, India on one side, there is a lot of development going on. How do you see that coming out? Like, and again, I mean, obviously, nobody's a
yeah.
crystal ball, but
Yeah, I mean, the times are so sensitive these days that you sometimes wonder what to say and what not to say.
well,
But
right, yeah,
I have sort of said or made a commentary on what you might say are parallel tendencies in India through the play itself. And while it is not rammed down, it has been quite effective. And I'll tell you this from the first 3 4 shows that we've had, where the some of the biggest audience laughs we've had are, when we point out the same. So there's a section in the play which talks about um, a scientist, a decorated scientist from Pakistan, talking of jinns, like genies, for being a source of energy, and stuff about cows and all that. So I I refer to those things as the parallel myths that tend to get propagated in India. That there were chariots in ancient India which were fired by nuclear energy, and cow urine has cancer curing properties, and it's an elixir of life, etc. And some of the biggest audience responses have been from there, and they've said that it is it's refreshing to see, while you are holding up a mirror in a way to the theocracy of Pakistan, there is also, in a sense, a holding up of a mirror to all the the reactionary, irrational elements within India. Having said that, while there are these parallels, this is my genuine belief. I've never been to Pakistan. I'm an outsider there, but having been in India for a long time, my general simplistic reading of the situation is that yes, while we have made progress in the sciences, I think more technology rather than fundamental sciences or deep research, more applications and things like that. It's the sheer vastness and diversity of India that I think acts as a natural, what should I say, resistive force to these type of things.
hmm,
So there is no, uh, you know, uh, uh, the Hindu faith has no single uh, guru. It has no single book. It has no single sort of belief systems, because it is so wide ranging, and that's like 70 80% of the population. And if I take the other Christians, Muslims, etc., the absolute variety and size of India, I think, prevents at some point of time extremist positions from sustaining themselves for too long. Now, I may be completely wrong, but this is my general view of the situation. That I find it difficult for somebody to, like, I would find it hard to believe that in 10 years' time, all of scientific research in India will be devoted towards Vedic science and stuff like that.
right,
I do
right,
not think that will happen. There will always be individual instances of potentially a science conference on some obscurantist thing, but I don't think from a from the stance of either the private sector or the government going after these sort of crackpot ideas, I don't think will happen, because mostly I
and
feel these extremist positions die out.
and you have good experience as well, because I mean, if I was reading it correctly, you grew up in the northeast, I
Yes.
think, in India, right? And like, so I mean, I think that's and now you are in Bangalore, so I mean, I think it's just sort of like, you also get a chance to see these kind of diversities and different contexts.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also feel that a large number of Indians have seen the benefits of sort of science and technology
Yeah,
in their day-to-day lives, in terms of the economic growth that it brings in. So uh, there are many people, in fact, and in certain ways, there is some sort of reconciliation, not everywhere, but in the like, there was this professor in IIT BHU, Banaras Hindu University. I'm forgetting his name now. A very fine civil engineer. In fact, he was one of the people who was like instrumental in I'm forgetting his name, fighting for the rejuvenation of the Ganga using scientific methods, etc. And he, at one level, he believed in the divine nature of the Ganga. So he would say that I know, as a scientist, what the, the coliform level is, and what how terrible the quality of water is. But at another level, I cannot help sort of going there and taking a bath.
Right.
I don't say necessarily that that's the way that everybody thinks, but there is this potential maybe of separating national policy from which I think
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was a sort of
At
like
least I
lovely
hope it
conversation.
happens.
Right. No, and this is a lovely conversation. I'm just, I really appreciate your efforts of bringing complex scientific ideas in both of your plays. There is science in there, although nobody should be afraid of it because it's done beautifully. I mean, it's done sort of like in a way that
Thank you.
flows very nicely. And and also of bringing these voices to theater, to the arts world. South Asian voices have been missing. I mean, I loved Copenhagen when it came out. I mean, I read Copenhagen, the play, and other which plays and movies that have come out about scientists. But I think uh, these are untold stories for science, in particular from South Asia. So I really appreciate it, and I also think, I mean, we are having a conversation, although I'm in the U.S., but certainly there is a cross-border element to it, and I really hope in some sense, and of course we keep on hoping, but uh, sanity prevails in terms of Pakistan and India, but also in terms of these cross-cultural exchanges, which used to be a lot more in terms of artists, and then it has dried out for political reasons. But I think science is another way of connecting across the border, and I mean, I work on astronomy, and certainly in the sky we see the same sky. It's not that much
Absolutely.
different, and so I really hope that these type of scientific exchanges, science and arts, I mean, in some sense, and you are bridging them together, that actually helps and sanity prevails.
Absolutely. So do I, inshallah.
Inshallah. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I will put a link to your website as well down below, and I hope if like people want to do a translation of your plays or other things, please
Yeah,
I will
yeah,
nudge them
absolutely.
in that direction.
And plays are meant to be performed by different groups. If there are people who want to perform them in your neck of the woods, or interested, very welcome to get in touch with me, because a play
Thank
is not the most portable thing in the world unless it is adopted and finds a home in other theater companies and so on.
And the beauty is that in every play, wherever it is performed, there is a local contextual element that come into play, and I think so from Pakistan also. I mean, I think it will be interesting how it should. By the way, I forgot to mention that just in honor of your interview, I am actually wearing a shirt McNeil, which was a play by Ayad Akhtar, who's a Pakistani American playwright, and this play was about AI, and
Oh.
it was performed in New York. And Robert Downey Jr., the actor, was actually played in there. So anyway, so I thought, I was like, okay, I'm having a conversation about play, so I should at least wear something play related.
Thank you, thank you, very nice of
So
you.
thank you. I
I think we
really,
exceeded
yeah,
our time.
no problem. This was a great conversation, but thank you so much.
Thank you.